dozens of hours into Bloodborne since its release, and I haven't seen everything. Chances are I never will. It is jam-packed with content and lore begging to be discovered, buried underneath the surface of one of the most difficult games of the generation. It's beautiful, it's well thought out, it has some of the best level design I've seen in a video game. It is exactly what video games needed in 2015, and I'm absolutely addicted to the game. But of course, it's not without its drawbacks. Some, I'm sad to say, are pretty huge, and I'm hoping the game gets a few patches sooner rather than later, because as it is, Bloodborne stands a great chance of being a Game of the Year contender, and it was only released in March. Many players will never finish Bloodborne, but it won't be for lack of trying. The game's skill level will simply be too high for them. That challenge level is a huge draw for a lot of gamers, myself included. Some bosses took me at least 10 tries before I could best them. One boss I'm pretty certain was well over 20. But the feeling of elation and accomplishment when I finally fell my foe is second to none in all of video gamedom. I'm still riding high from taking down a few of my more troublesome enemies. Bloodborne is from Software, the developers of Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1 and 2. For all intents and purposes, it plays almost identically to most of the previous Souls games, but with some tweaks, most of which I feel improve the formula, while at other times, I wonder if From learns from their mistakes. Everything that was once called Soul in the Souls games is pretty much now called Blood. Blood is your experience and your currency. You use it to upgrade your weapons, and probably as a replacement for Gatorade. It's an action RPG where players create a monster hunter character and roam gigantic cities and forests and fortresses and haunted castles and everywhere else in between, slaying anything that will scratch, slash, bite, or bludgeon you to death. Combat encounters often happen suddenly and are over just as quickly as they're started. Every enemy encounter is a life or death situation, but a successful encounter will grant a sliver of experience, both the measurable type that can be seen in the game's UI, but more importantly, also the life experience that will teach the player about that particular monster's behaviors and attack patterns that hopefully will save them from a future traumatic episode. With Bloodborne, it's not live and learn, it's die and learn. A majority of the game is played on one gigantic, interconnected map that twists and winds in and out of itself, complete with shortcuts and secret passageways. When a player ventures far enough, lampposts are discovered that act both as a checkpoint and as a portal back to the central Nexus area, complete with a shop, an upgrade station, and portals to other parts of the world. Without a doubt, this is the best world design I've ever seen in a video game. Hands down. Just the amount of time and skill that was needed to plan out the map astounds me. And then on top of that, the architecture is marvelous, and the art, though twisted, shows the skills of a team who has really done their research in romantic and gothic art and literature. Even the themes within the game heavily reflect the Romantic era. A heavy emphasis on escapism and world detail and medievalism, strong usage of horror and using themes like xenophobia to drive home the story. Playing Bloodborne feels like going on an archaeological exploration on top of slaying monsters and demons. It's wonderful. Despite my addiction, I'm not all praises for Bloodborne. The game has some serious problems in the days shortly after its launch. For starters, the load times are absolutely ridiculous. On average, I was counting a 35-second load screen after I would die. Putting that load screen on top of the fact that the game is so difficult means you're going to be looking at that load screen a lot. But the load times aren't my biggest problem with the game, though it is a big one. Almost everything about the current state of the game's cooperative play, in my eyes, is broken, and I think it needs to be looked at once again. To play cooperatively, players need 2 items. A large bell that one player, the host, rings to call other players for help, and a small bell that players will ring to join hosts who are in need of a helping hand. Calling for help uses a currency called Insight. Insight isn't as easily obtained as blood for less skillful players. Insight is gained by fighting and defeating bosses either in your own game or in someone else's. If 2 players that ring their bells are within the same game area and are 10 levels apart or less of one another, then the game will bring them together into one world. A little complicated, but so far so good. The large bell is obtained simply by playing the game. The small bell, you have to buy it from a hidden in-game vendor using Insight, the more esoteric currency. Why? That is so intentionally obtuse, it's frustrating. It blows my mind that a developer would intentionally bury a core game mechanic so deeply from its players. There is nothing within the game that says, to play cooperatively, go to this tucked-away vendor and buy these items from this grocery list. I could understand if the bells were sold through the standard vendor and simply used blood to purchase them. Players would probably pick them up out of curiosity and read their item descriptions to figure out what they were. That would still require a bit of sleuthing on the player's behalf, and it would still leave Bloodborne with its air of enigma. But as it is, I had to Google to find out how to use the game's cooperative gameplay system. If you need to Google to understand a core gameplay feature, then you've done something wrong. And I'm not new to the Souls series. If there is one good thing that comes from hiding the cooperative function, it's that it forces the player into searching for that information online and drives home the point that Bloodborne is a community-driven game. Wiki pages, fan and community sites are practically essential to the experience, and these places are often a well of knowledge for people curious about item descriptions, hidden secrets, or even lore, which is absolutely fascinating, by the way. But an even bigger problem with the game's cooperative gameplay is its servers. They are horrible at the time of this review. A friend and I tested out joining into each other's games with mixed to horrendous results. I was able to join his game roughly 50% of the time after sitting and waiting for the game to respond, sometimes well over 10 minutes. He was able to join into mine maybe once or twice. Kind of a big bummer. The game also supports public cooperative play with strangers, just like past Souls games. For the most part, I was able to join into random players' games without a problem, but calling them into my world? Big problems. Problem 1. The wait. I would wait and wait and wait and wait outside a boss room for people to pop into my game. At one point, I had Bloodborne running for 20 minutes before someone came into my game. It was a high-traffic area with a lot of people within my level. I helped several people defeat that particular boss that day, and I would enter their world the instant I would ring my small cooperative bell. So, the lack of players wasn't the problem. It's the servers. Problem 2. The Insight currency system needs a slight tweaking at the moment. It costs 1 insight to ring your bell that calls for help. I would spend what little insight I'd have left, ring my bell, pray that I would get a cooperative partner before dying, just to have the game throw up a network error that forces the game to restart and never refund my insight. It wasn't long until I was completely without insight to call anyone for help. Wow! This exact problem existed in Dark Souls until From patched it out. Network and cooperative play and hidden shops aside, there are a few other issues with the game. I experienced quite a few framerate drops in some areas. Playing cooperatively only exacerbated the problem. It's a gorgeous game, but it clearly is pushing the PlayStation 4 to its limits. The in-game menu gives too little information in some regards. Again, this is where Bloodborne straddles the line between enigmatic and simply bad design, while the on-screen notifications can give redundant information, like the searching for cooperative bell notification, that take up entirely too much screen real estate. Potential problem. There are fewer weapons and armor options compared to the previous Souls games. Yes, each weapon has a double use, but most players I've encountered all had similar builds or wore the same clothes. It takes away the individual flair that the previous Souls games would give its players. Magic and ranged combat feel a little underdeveloped compared to previous Souls games, where the magic effects would be bombastic and dynamic. That makes me worry a little bit about the game's replayability, using a vastly different character build. But even if players only play through the game once, I think there's more than enough value here to warrant a purchase. Those complaints aside, I think Bloodborne is something special. I love it, despite its few broken chunks. It's huge, it's beautiful, it's expertly crafted. I love the faster-paced combat. I adore the environmental design. The challenge made me clench my fists and shake them at the sky, but overcoming those challenges far outweighs the uphill battle. It's the first must-own game I can think of for the PlayStation 4, but having said that, I don't think it's worth the purchase of an entire console. More often than not, it reminds me of playing the original Castlevania on the NES, which is a very, very good thing. This video is made possible through generous fan donations on Patreon.